Welcome to our peaceful corner of the internet, where stories are here to help you drift off to a place of rest and calm. Tonight we invite you to settle down, let go of the day's worries, and sink into a soothing bedtime story crafted just for you. Each word, each scene is carefully designed to help your mind unwind, your body relax, and your thoughts slow down. So, find a comfortable position, take a deep breath, and let the story gently guide you to a restful night's sleep. Close your eyes, listen closely, and let tonight's journey begin.
Lucas had always been a wanderer, drifting from one place to another in search of stories. This time, his journey brought him to a small seaside town, tucked away from the bustling cities he was used to. The town seemed frozen in time, with cobblestone streets, pastel-colored houses, and the smell of salt water lingering in the air. It was the perfect place to escape his writer's block. As he walked along the quiet streets, he noticed something peculiar: a small, weathered bookshop nestled between a cafe and an antique store. Its sign, faded but elegant, read, "Books for the heart, stories for the soul." The shop seemed like it was pulled straight from a forgotten storybook, with ivy creeping up its stone walls and a heavy wooden door that looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. Lucas felt a sudden urge to step inside, as if the shop itself was calling to him. He pushed the creaky door open, and a tiny bell above the entrance chimed softly, announcing his arrival. Inside, the bookshop was a world of its own. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air, mingled with the faint aroma of lavender. The space was dimly lit, with sunlight streaming through a dusty window, casting golden rays that illuminated floating specks of dust. Shelves stretched up to the ceiling, crammed with books of all shapes, sizes, and colors. It was the kind of place where you could easily lose yourself for hours, discovering forgotten stories and hidden gems. Lucas walked slowly, running his fingers along the spines of the books. Each one seemed to have a story of its own, not just in its pages, but in the worn edges and faded covers. He couldn't help but smile. It felt like he had stumbled upon a treasure trove. In the back corner, a small desk was piled high with books and a single flickering candle. Behind it sat an elderly woman, her silver hair tied back in a loose bun. She was hunched over a book, reading intently, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Lucas hesitated for a moment before clearing his throat. "Hello," he said softly. The woman looked up, and for a moment, Lucas felt as though she was peering into his very soul. Her eyes, a striking shade of blue, seemed far too lively for someone her age. She smiled warmly, the kind of smile that made you feel at home instantly. "Welcome," she said, her voice gentle and soothing. "I'm Agnes, the keeper of this little sanctuary. It's rare to have a visitor on a weekday." "I couldn't help but come in," Lucas admitted. "This place, it feels different." Agnes nodded knowingly. "It has that effect on people. Books have a way of finding those who need them." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her words. "Do you believe that a book can find its reader?" Agnes chuckled softly. "Oh, absolutely. The right story at the right time can change a person's life. Haven't you ever felt that?" Lucas thought about it and realized he had many times. It was part of the reason he became a writer, to create stories that might resonate with someone the way certain books had resonated with him. Agnes reached under her desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Its cover was worn, but the gold lettering on the spine still shone brightly. "Tales of the Forgotten." "I think this might be the one for you," she said, handing the book to Lucas. He took it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It wasn't a large book, but it felt substantial, as though it contained more than just words on a page. "Go on, open it," Agnes urged, her eyes twinkling with a mysterious light. Lucas hesitated, then gently opened the cover. The pages were filled with handwritten stories, each one penned in elegant flowing script. He flipped through, noticing that the stories seemed to be written by different people. Some pages were old and yellowed, while others looked freshly written. "Who wrote these?" Lucas asked, looking up. Agnes simply smiled. "They are stories left behind by those who have visited this shop over the years. Each one is a piece of someone's heart." Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if the book was alive, pulsing with the memories of its previous owners. He could almost hear their whispers, feel their hopes and dreams etched into the ink. "This place is special, isn't it?" he said quietly. Agnes nodded, her expression turning wistful. "It is. It's a place where stories come to rest, where they wait for the right person to pick them up and give them life once more." Lucas felt a swell of inspiration, the kind he hadn't felt in months. He looked around the shop, at the endless rows of books, and knew he had found something extraordinary. "Thank you," he said, clutching the book to his chest. "I think I needed this." "You're welcome," Agnes replied with a smile. "Come back any time. There's always more to discover here."
As Lucas stepped out of the shop and back into the sunlit street, he felt lighter, as if a burden he didn't even know he was carrying had been lifted. He glanced back at the shop, half expecting it to have disappeared, but it was still there, as real as the cobblestones beneath his feet. He couldn't wait to see what stories lay ahead, both in the book and in this little town by the sea. Lucas stepped through the creaking door of the old bookshop, feeling a rush of warm air and the scent of aged paper envelop him. The place was small and dimly lit, but cozy. Wooden shelves reached up to the ceiling, filled with books of all kinds, their spines showing the wear of countless hands that had flipped through their pages. It felt like stepping into a different world, a place frozen in time. He moved slowly between the aisles, trailing his fingers along the rows of books, feeling the rough texture of their spines. It had been years since he last wandered into a shop like this. Nowadays, everything was digital and quick, but this place was a sanctuary for anyone who still loved the slow, deliberate act of choosing a book. "Can I help you find something, dear?" A soft, melodic voice startled him. Lucas turned around to see an elderly woman standing behind the counter. Her silver hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she wore a pair of round spectacles perched at the edge of her nose. There was a kindness in her eyes that made him feel at ease. "I'm not sure yet," Lucas replied, smiling awkwardly. "I'm just browsing for now." "Browsing is the best part, isn't it?" she said, with a knowing smile. "The books have a way of finding the right person, I always say." Lucas chuckled. "Do they?" "Oh, absolutely," she nodded. "I've been here long enough to see it happen over and over. The right story has a way of revealing itself when it's needed the most." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like the books are alive." The woman's eyes twinkled. "In a way they are. They hold pieces of people's souls, their thoughts and dreams. When you read a story, you're not just reading words on a page. You're sharing a moment with someone who lived a different life." Lucas considered her words, feeling the weight of them settle in his mind. There was something special about this place, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He glanced around the shop again, noticing how quiet it was, as if the very air were listening. "I'm Lucas, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Agnes," the woman replied, shaking his hand gently. Her skin was soft but firm, and she had a grip that hinted at years of hard work. "Welcome to the old bookshop by the sea. It's been here for nearly a century, passed down through my family." Lucas felt a wave of nostalgia, thinking of the bookstores he used to visit with his mother when he was a child. They would spend hours together, getting lost in stories and forgetting the world outside. He hadn't realized how much he missed that feeling. "What brings you here today, Lucas?" Agnes asked, her tone light but curious. "You don't strike me as a tourist." He hesitated. It was a fair question, but the answer wasn't simple. He had come to this seaside town seeking a break, a place to escape his chaotic life back in the city. He had lost his inspiration to write, and his career, once promising, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that he needed something to change. "I needed a break," Lucas admitted. "I'm a writer, but I've been stuck lately. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help." Agnes nodded thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving his. "Ah, a writer? This place must feel like a treasure chest to you." Lucas smiled. "It does, actually. I haven't felt this inspired in a while." Agnes leaned forward, her voice lowering slightly. "You know, Lucas, the best stories often find us when we're not looking for them. When we're at our lowest, that's when the magic tends to happen." He looked at her, intrigued. There was something almost mystical about the way she spoke, as if she were privy to secrets he couldn't understand yet. "You sound like you've seen this happen before." "Oh, many times," Agnes said with a laugh. "People wander into this shop looking for a distraction, a bit of entertainment, or maybe even just shelter from the rain, but often they leave with something much more meaningful. A story they needed to read, a character they needed to meet, or a lesson they didn't know they were searching for." Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "That's a beautiful thought." Agnes reached under the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was old, with frayed edges and a gold title that had almost worn off. She placed it in front of him gently, as if it were a rare treasure. "This," she said softly, "is for you." Lucas picked up the book, feeling its weight in his hands. "What is it?" "A collection of stories," Agnes replied. "But not just any stories. These are tales of people who found themselves at a crossroads much like you. It's called Tales of the Forgotten. I think you'll find it enlightening." Lucas opened the book, flipping through the pages. The stories seemed ordinary at first glance, but there was something about the way the words were written, a depth and emotion that pulled him in. "Thank you," he said, looking up at her. "But why give this to me? You've only just met me." Agnes smiled, a mysterious curve to her lips. "Because sometimes the book finds the reader, not the other way around. And I believe this book has found you for a reason." Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded and tucked the book under his arm. As he turned to leave, Agnes called out to him one last time. "Take your time with it, Lucas," she said. "The best stories are the ones we savor." He nodded, stepping out of the shop and back into the cool evening air. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore greeted him once again, but the world felt different now, as if it had shifted ever so slightly. Lucas glanced back at the shop's window, half expecting to see Agnes watching him. But the shop was empty, its door closed and the lights dimmed. Clutching the book tightly, Lucas made his way down the cobblestone street, feeling a spark of curiosity ignite within him. He had come here searching for inspiration, and maybe, just maybe, he had found the first flicker of it. Lucas couldn't get the old bookshop out of his mind. He had spent the entire night leafing through the pages of Tales of the Forgotten, feeling as though he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. The stories inside were unlike anything he had ever read. They were tales of ordinary people with extraordinary moments, crossroads in their lives where a single decision had changed everything. It was as if the book was speaking directly to him, drawing him in deeper with every word. The next morning, Lucas found himself standing once again in front of the old bookshop by the sea. He hadn't planned on returning so soon, but something about the shop and about Agnes felt magnetic. It was like an invisible thread was pulling him back. He pushed the door open, the familiar creak greeting him like an old friend. "Ah, you've returned," Agnes said, looking up from behind the counter. She had a knowing smile on her face, as if she had expected him. "How did you like the book?" "It's incredible," Lucas admitted, holding it up. "I stayed up reading it all night. It's like each story was speaking to me directly. I've never experienced anything like it." Agnes nodded, pleased. "I thought you might feel that way. The stories in that book have a way of resonating with those who need them." Lucas frowned, curious. "But how is that possible? They're just stories, right?" "Ah, but stories are never just stories, Lucas," Agnes replied. "They're pieces of our lives, reflections of our deepest desires and fears. Sometimes, a story is the mirror we need to see ourselves clearly." Lucas leaned against the counter, feeling an urge to learn more. "How did you know this was the right book for me?" Agnes tilted her head, as if considering how much she wanted to reveal. "The shop has a way of knowing what people need. I've been here long enough to understand its language." "The shop's language?" Lucas echoed, feeling a shiver of intrigue. "What do you mean?" Agnes gave him a cryptic smile and gestured for him to follow her. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." She led him deeper into the bookshop, past rows of dusty shelves filled with old, leather-bound volumes. The air seemed to grow heavier, and Lucas noticed that the temperature had dropped slightly. They arrived at a small alcove in the back of the shop that he hadn't noticed before. It was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the room. "This," Agnes said, pointing to a large, weathered book that lay open on a wooden lectern, "is the Book of Memories." Lucas stepped closer, peering at the thick, yellowed pages. "What is it?" Agnes's voice softened, almost reverent. "It's a collection of memories from people who have visited the shop. Some leave their stories behind willingly. Others do so without realizing it. Each entry is a glimpse into a moment of their lives, captured forever in these pages." Lucas was mesmerized. He ran his fingers lightly over the page, careful not to smudge the delicate ink. The entry he was looking at seemed to tell the story of a young woman who had lost her way after a breakup, only to find herself in this very shop, where a book had helped her rediscover her strength. "This is incredible," Lucas breathed. "It's like a living archive of people's experiences." Agnes nodded. "It is. And the shop has a way of guiding people to the right story when they need it most, just like it did with you." Lucas felt a surge of emotion, a mix of wonder and disbelief. "But why? Why would the shop do this?" Agnes's smile was gentle, almost wistful. "Perhaps because stories have the power to heal. When we see our own struggles reflected in the pages of a book, we realize we're not alone. We find hope, or understanding, or even just a moment of comfort. That's what this place is about." Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He thought about his own life, his struggles as a writer, and the sense of aimlessness that had brought him to this seaside town. He had been searching for something, even if he hadn't known it at the time. "Can I read more of these?" he asked, gesturing to the Book of Memories. Agnes shook her head gently. "No, I'm afraid not. The book only opens itself to those who are ready to leave a piece of their own story behind. It's not something that can be forced or rushed." Lucas nodded, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and understanding. "I get it. It's not my time yet." "Exactly," Agnes said, her eyes twinkling. "But don't worry, Lucas. When you're ready, you'll know." Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the bookshop and its mysterious magic, but for Agnes as well. She had seen something in him that he hadn't even recognized in himself. He realized that he hadn't felt this inspired, this alive, in years. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything."
Agnes reached out and patted his hand. "It's my pleasure, dear. Remember, you're always welcome here. And sometimes the answers we're searching for have a way of finding us when we least expect them." Lucas left the alcove feeling lighter, as though a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. As he made his way back through the shop, he paused by one of the shelves. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books, feeling a connection to each one. He picked up a small, unassuming volume titled The Road Home. He hadn't intended to take another book today, but something about this one felt right. He tucked it under his arm, deciding he would buy it on his way out. Before he reached the counter, he glanced back one last time at Agnes. She was watching him with that same knowing smile, as if she could see the new story that was beginning to unfold in his life. With a nod of gratitude, Lucas stepped out into the sunlight, clutching the book tightly. He knew he would be back soon, and he couldn't wait to see where the journey would take him next. The days passed, and Lucas found himself visiting the old bookshop by the sea more frequently. Each time he discovered something new, a hidden corner, a forgotten volume, or a peculiar detail he hadn't noticed before. It felt like the shop was revealing itself to him little by little, as though it was a living entity that had decided he was trustworthy. One particularly stormy afternoon, Lucas pushed open the door, greeted by the warm, familiar scent of old books and the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows. The weather had driven most people inside their homes, and the shop was unusually empty. As Lucas shook the rain from his coat, he noticed Agnes at the counter, her expression unusually tense. "Is everything okay?" Lucas asked, stepping closer. Agnes glanced at him and gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're expecting a visitor today," she said quietly, "and I'm not sure what it means." Lucas frowned, confused. "A visitor? But you have people coming in all the time." "Not like this," Agnes replied, her voice hushed. "This one hasn't been here in a very long time. He's an old friend of the shop." Lucas couldn't tell if she meant it literally or metaphorically, but before he could ask more, the door creaked open again, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark overcoat that seemed out of place against the backdrop of the cozy bookshop. His face was sharp, with high cheekbones and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Agnes," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, like the rumble of distant thunder. Agnes nodded, her expression unreadable. "Victor, it's been a long time." The stranger, Victor, gave a slight bow. "Too long, perhaps. I see the shop is still as lively as ever. And you? You haven't changed a bit." Agnes let out a dry chuckle. "Time has a different meaning here, as you well know." Lucas watched their exchange, feeling like he was intruding on something private. He cleared his throat awkwardly, and the stranger's gaze flicked to him, sharp and assessing. "And who might this be?" Victor asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This is Lucas," Agnes said, stepping closer to him protectively. "A friend of the shop." Victor's smile was thin, almost mocking. "A friend of the shop? You don't hear that often. Tell me, Lucas, what brings you here?" Lucas hesitated, thrown off by the intensity of the man's gaze. I've been coming here to read," he managed. "I find the place comforting." Victor tilted his head, as if he found this answer amusing. "Comforting? Is that so? And what is it you're searching for in these pages, I wonder?"
Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but he realized he didn't know the answer. He had been asking himself the same question since he first stepped into the shop. Why had he been drawn here? What was he hoping to find? Agnes intervened, stepping between them. "That's enough, Victor," she said firmly. "He's not here for you." Victor held up his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant, Agnes. I'm just curious about your new protégé." Lucas felt a flicker of frustration. He didn't like being talked about as though he wasn't there. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Victor's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of mild surprise. "Straight to the point. I like that. You see, Lucas, I've come to collect something that belongs to me." Agnes's expression darkened. "You know the rules, Victor. Nothing leaves this shop unless it's meant to." Victor's eyes gleamed. Yes, the rules. But rules can be bent, can't they? Especially when it comes to something as important as this. Lucas watched the exchange, feeling more confused by the second. "What are you talking about?" Agnes turned to him, her face softening. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Lucas. Victor and I have old business." Victor chuckled. "Old business indeed, but I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a particular book, and then I'll be on my way." "What book?" Lucas asked before he could stop himself. Agnes shot him a warning look, but it was too late. Victor's eyes locked onto his, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "A book you've already seen," Victor said slowly. "Tales of the Forgotten." Lucas felt a jolt of recognition. But why? It's just a collection of stories. "Oh, Lucas," Victor said with a sigh. "You still don't understand, do you? Those stories are more than mere words on a page. They hold pieces of people's lives, moments they've chosen to leave behind, and one of those pieces belongs to me." Lucas turned to Agnes, searching her face for answers. "Is that true?" Agnes hesitated, then gave a small nod. "It is. But the stories are meant to stay here. They're not his to take." Victor's smile turned cold. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he strode toward the shelf where Tales of the Forgotten rested. Lucas felt a surge of panic. He didn't know why, but the thought of Victor taking the book felt wrong, like a violation of something sacred. "Wait!" Lucas shouted, stepping forward. Victor paused, turning to look at him with a raised eyebrow. "Yes?" Lucas didn't know what he was going to say. He just knew he couldn't let Victor take the book. "You can't just take it. It's part of the shop. It's part of the people who left their stories behind." Victor's expression softened, almost pitying. "Oh, Lucas, you're more connected to this place than you realize, but you're still so naive." Agnes stepped in front of Lucas, her eyes blazing with a rare intensity. "Leave, Victor. You're not welcome here anymore." For a moment, the two of them locked eyes, a silent battle of wills. Then, to Lucas's surprise, Victor gave a slight bow. "As you wish," he said softly. "But remember this, Agnes. Nothing stays hidden forever." With that, he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Lucas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. What just happened? Agnes looked at him, her face filled with a sadness he hadn't seen before. "You've just met a part of the shop's past, Lucas, and I fear it won't be the last time." The atmosphere in the old bookshop by the sea was tense after Victor's abrupt departure. The encounter left Lucas with more questions than answers, but Agnes seemed reluctant to explain further. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something much deeper than a mere disagreement over a book. He needed to understand what was really happening. The rain had subsided, but the skies remained grey as Lucas made his way back to the shop the next day. Agnes was at her usual spot behind the counter, but she looked weary, as though she had aged overnight. She greeted Lucas with a thin smile, but there was a heaviness in her eyes. "Back again so soon?" she asked, her voice soft. Lucas nodded, hesitating before he spoke. "I need to know what's going on, Agnes. Who is Victor, really? And why does he want tales of the forgotten?" Agnes sighed and gestured for him to follow her. She led him to the back of the shop, to a small, cozy nook where they could speak in private. The walls were lined with books that looked ancient, their spines worn and faded. Agnes sat down in a plush armchair and motioned for Lucas to take a seat opposite her. "You've seen things here that most people don't," Agnes began. "The shop has a way of revealing its secrets to those who are meant to understand them. But some secrets are darker than others." Lucas leaned forward, listening intently. "What do you mean?" Agnes took a deep breath as though preparing herself to tell a story she had kept buried for a long time. "Many years ago, when I was much younger, the shop had a different purpose. It wasn't just a place for people to find books. It was a refuge for lost souls, people who had stories they couldn't carry anymore, memories they needed to leave behind. They would come here, and the shop would take their stories, sealing them within the pages of special books like Tales of the Forgotten." Lucas frowned, trying to comprehend what she was saying. "You mean the stories in that book? They're real?" Agnes nodded. "Yes. They're fragments of people's lives, memories they chose to part with. Some were too painful to hold on to, while others were simply too precious to share with anyone else. The shop became a sanctuary, a place where these stories could rest safely." "But what does that have to do with Victor?" Lucas pressed. Agnes's expression darkened. "Victor was once one of those lost souls. He came here a long time ago, burdened with a memory he couldn't bear. He left it behind in the shop, like so many others before him. But something changed. He became obsessed with reclaiming what he had given up." Lucas thought back to the confrontation with Victor. "That's why he wants the book, because his story is in it." "Yes," Agnes confirmed. "But it's more than that. Victor doesn't just want his story back. He wants to undo the choice he made. He believes that if he can retrieve the memory, he can rewrite his own past." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "Can he do that?" Agnes shook her head. "No one can change the past, Lucas. The memories in the books are echoes, fragments of what once was. They can be revisited, but they can't be altered. Victor knows this, but he's blinded by his desperation." Lucas sat back, trying to process everything. It was hard to believe, yet it made a strange kind of sense. He had felt the shop's magic from the moment he first stepped inside. So what happens now? Will he come back for it? Agnes looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know. But I do know that the shop won't let him take it. The stories belong here now. They're part of the fabric of this place." Lucas hesitated before asking his next question, fearing the answer. "Is there a story of mine in there?" Agnes looked up, her eyes filled with a sadness that made Lucas's heart ache. "Not yet," she said quietly. "But the shop has a way of finding what we don't even know we've lost. You're here for a reason, Lucas. And maybe, in time, you'll discover what that reason is." Before he could respond, a sudden gust of wind blew through the shop, rattling the windows and making the bookshelves creak. Agnes stood up abruptly, her expression alarmed. "Something's happening." Lucas followed her gaze to the front of the shop, where the door had blown open. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, soaked from the rain, her face pale and frightened. She clutched a small, leather-bound book to her chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need help." Agnes rushed forward, wrapping an arm around the woman's shoulders and guiding her inside. Come in, my dear, you're safe here. Lucas watched as Agnes led the woman to a chair where she collapsed, exhausted and shivering. He noticed the book she was holding, a volume identical to Tales of the Forgotten. It looked old, the leather cover worn and cracked, as though it had been handled many times. "Where did you get that?" Lucas asked, unable to hide his shock. The woman looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know," she sobbed. I found it. And when I opened it, I saw my own memories inside. Memories I didn't even know I had." Agnes's face went pale, and she gently took the book from the woman's hands. "It's happening again," she murmured, more to herself than to Lucas. "What's happening?" Lucas demanded, feeling a surge of fear. Agnes turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. "The stories are waking up, Lucas. The shop is trying to tell us something." Lucas glanced around, feeling the air change, as though the very walls were whispering. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was only the beginning. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the shop. And whatever was coming next, he knew he couldn't face it alone.
The old bookshop felt different after the arrival of the young woman clutching her mysterious book. A palpable tension hung in the air, as if the entire shop was holding its breath. Agnes and Lucas exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Something had shifted. The woman's unexpected appearance, drenched and clutching Tales of the Forgotten, had set a new course neither of them could fully comprehend yet. The rain outside had picked up again, pounding against the shop's windows in a steady, rhythmic beat. Agnes, ever the caretaker, fetched a blanket and draped it around the woman's shoulders. Her hands were trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Lucas knelt beside her, speaking in a soft, soothing tone. "Can you tell us your name?" he asked gently. The woman took a deep breath as if trying to ground herself. "It's Emily," she whispered. "I don't understand what's happening. One moment I was walking along the beach and the next I found myself here, holding this book." She glanced down at the volume in her hands, her expression a mix of wonder and terror. Agnes sat down beside Emily, taking her hand. "You're safe now, my dear," she assured her. "But I need you to tell us everything you remember. Start from the beginning." Emily nodded, her gaze distant as she tried to recall the events that had brought her here. "I was visiting the old pier," she began. "It's a place I go to clear my mind. I've been feeling lost lately, like I don't know who I am anymore. While I was there, I found this book just lying on a bench. It was soaked through, but when I picked it up, it felt like it belonged to me." Lucas exchanged a look with Agnes. He knew that feeling, the strange sense of connection to a book in this shop. He'd experienced it himself when he first picked up Tales of the Forgotten. "When I opened it," Emily continued, her voice barely more than a whisper, "I saw pages filled with memories, my memories, things I hadn't thought about in years. It was like the book was showing me pieces of my own life I'd forgotten." Agnes leaned back, her face serious. "That's the magic of this place, Emily," she said quietly. "The bookshop holds stories, but not just the ones written on the pages. It holds the fragments of our own lives, the moments we've lost or tried to leave behind." Emily's eyes widened. "But why me? Why now?" Agnes looked down at the book in Emily's hands. "Sometimes the shop chooses us," she explained. "It finds people who need to remember something important. You must have a story that needs to be told, a memory you've forgotten that's calling out to you." Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He had always sensed there was more to the shop than met the eye, but hearing Agnes put it into words made it feel even more real, even more magical. He couldn't help but wonder what memories the shop might have in store for him. Suddenly, a loud creaking noise echoed through the room. It was the sound of a heavy door opening, a sound Lucas hadn't heard before. He looked around in confusion until he realized it was coming from the far end of the shop, where the wall of ancient books stood. One of the shelves had swung open, revealing a hidden passageway. Agnes stood up, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "This hasn't happened in years," she murmured. "What is it?" Lucas asked, his heart pounding. Agnes turned to him, her face pale. "It's the memory passage," she explained. "It only opens when a story needs to be found." Emily stood up abruptly, clutching her book. "I have to go in there," she said, her voice filled with a sudden, inexplicable urgency. "I feel like it's calling me." Agnes reached out, trying to stop her. "Emily, wait! You don't know what you're walking into. The passage shows memories, but it can also show regrets, fears, things you might not be ready to face." But Emily shook her head, her resolve firm. "I need to know," she insisted. "I can't keep living like this, feeling like there's something missing, something I've lost." Lucas stepped forward. "I'm coming with you," he said without hesitation. "If this shop has taught me anything, it's that some journeys shouldn't be taken alone." Agnes hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Very well," she said. "But be careful. The memory passage can be unpredictable. It shows what it needs to show, and once you're inside, you might not be able to leave until you've faced what's hidden." With that warning hanging in the air, Lucas and Emily stepped toward the open shelf. The air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and sea salt. It was like stepping into a different world entirely. The walls of the passage were lined with shelves, each one filled with books that seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy.
As they moved deeper into the passage, the air grew colder and the light dimmed. Shadows danced along the walls, and Lucas felt a strange sensation, as though he were being watched by the memories held within the books. Suddenly, a book slid off a shelf and landed at Emily's feet. She bent down to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it to the first page. Her eyes widened as she read the words aloud. "This is my childhood," she whispered. "It's a memory of a day at the beach with my mother. I'd forgotten all about it." Lucas looked over her shoulder, seeing the vibrant image of a young girl playing by the water, laughing as the waves crashed around her. He could almost hear the sound of the ocean, feel the warmth of the sun on his face. "This place," Emily said, her voice filled with awe. "It's helping me remember who I am." Lucas nodded, feeling a surge of hope. Perhaps the passage was more than just a hidden hallway of memories. Perhaps it was a path to finding themselves. But as they continued walking deeper into the shadows, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the shop was guiding them towards something much bigger than just forgotten memories. Something that could change everything they thought they knew. The air was cool and heavy in the memory passage, as if the atmosphere itself was laden with stories. Lucas and Emily moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridor, the light of the old bookshop fading behind them. The walls were lined with ancient volumes, each spine inscribed with a name or a symbol that seemed to shimmer faintly, like whispers waiting to be heard. Lucas glanced at Emily. Her face was a mixture of awe and fear, her fingers clutching the book that had brought her here. He wanted to say something comforting, but he wasn't sure what words would be enough. Instead, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She looked up and gave him a small, grateful smile. "Where do you think this leads?" Emily asked, her voice hushed, as though she didn't want to disturb the memories lingering around them. "I don't know," Lucas admitted. But Agnes seemed worried. "This passage hasn't been opened in years," she said. "It must mean something." As they ventured deeper, the darkness thickened. The only light came from the faint glow of the books on the shelves. Emily reached out to touch one, her fingers grazing the aged leather cover. As soon as she did, the book opened on its own, flipping to a page filled with delicate handwriting. Emily gasped. "It's my mother's handwriting," she whispered, her voice trembling. This is her journal. The page showed a beautiful sketch of a seaside village with a small child playing in the sand. Emily's breath hitched as she realized it was a memory from her own childhood, one she hadn't thought of in years. Her mother had captured the moment in words and pictures, preserving it forever in this hidden book. She must have come here, Emily murmured. But why? What was she looking for? Lucas watched her, feeling the weight of the moment. Maybe she was like you, he suggested gently. Maybe she was searching for something she couldn't quite remember. Emily traced the lines of the sketch with her fingertips, tears welling up in her eyes. I thought I'd lost this memory forever, she admitted. I didn't even realize how much I needed to remember it. Lucas squeezed her shoulder. This place has a way of finding the memories we've buried deep, he said softly. But it's not just about remembering. It's about understanding why we forgot in the first place. They continued down the passage, leaving the book behind as it gently closed itself, the cover humming with a soft glow. The corridor twisted and turned, and Lucas realized they were descending deeper underground. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath misting in front of him. Look, Emily said suddenly, pointing ahead. There was a faint light at the end of the passage, flickering like the flame of a candle. They stepped closer, finding themselves in a small, circular room. In the center was a stone pedestal, and resting on it was a single, unmarked book. The room was quiet, except for the soft rustle of pages turning, even though there was no wind. Lucas approached the pedestal, feeling a strange pull. He glanced at Emily, who nodded, urging him to open the book. He hesitated for a moment, then carefully lifted the cover. The pages were blank at first, but then ink started to appear, as if an invisible hand were writing before their eyes. It wasn't a story, but a question. What is it that you seek? Lucas and Emily exchanged a bewildered look. The question seemed directed at them, but it wasn't clear how they were meant to answer. Emily swallowed hard. I came here because I felt like something was missing in my life, she said aloud, as though speaking directly to the book. I don't know what it is, but I thought maybe this place could help me find it. The book paused, the ink shimmering, then continued. To find what you seek, you must first confront what you fear. As the words appeared, the room began to shift. The walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by swirling images and sounds. It was as if they were standing in the middle of a dream. Lucas could see snippets of his own past, his childhood home, his parents' faces, the moment he first walked into Agnes's bookshop. He turned to Emily and saw her watching a different set of images, a young girl running along the beach, a woman's laughter echoing through the air. But then, the images darkened. The laughter faded, replaced by the sound of waves crashing violently against the shore. Emily's face contorted in pain as she watched the scene play out. I remember this, she said, her voice breaking. It was the day my mother disappeared. Lucas stepped closer, taking her hand. I'm here, he whispered. You're not alone. Emily squeezed his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. I was only a child, she said. I didn't understand what was happening. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. The images shifted again, showing a younger Emily crying on the beach, calling out for her mother. The waves swallowed her voice, and the memory dissolved into darkness. The book on the pedestal wrote a final line. The answers you seek are not in the past, but in what you choose to do now. Emily let out a shuddering breath. I've spent so many years searching for something, closure, an explanation, but maybe it's time to let go. Lucas nodded, understanding dawning on him as well. We can't change the past, he said, but we can decide what kind of story we want to write from here on out. The room slowly returned to its original state, the swirling images fading away. The book on the pedestal closed itself gently, the soft, rustling sound almost like a sigh. Emily looked at Lucas, her expression one of quiet resolve. "I think I know what I need to do now," she said. Lucas smiled. "Then let's go back," he said. "Agnes will be waiting for us." Together they turned and made their way back through the memory passage, leaving behind the hidden room and its mysterious book. The shadows seemed to part for them, guiding their way. And as they walked, Lucas couldn't help but feel that the real journey was only just beginning. Lucas and Emily emerged from the memory passage, the atmosphere of the old bookshop by the sea embracing them like a familiar friend. The air felt lighter, almost as if the secrets they had uncovered had lifted a weight from the place. Agnes was waiting for them, standing behind the counter with an expression that was a mix of relief and quiet knowing. "You found what you needed," she said softly, looking at Emily. Her voice was gentle, but there was a gravity to it, as if she already knew the answer. Emily nodded. "I did," she admitted, a small, bittersweet smile playing on her lips. "But I think there's more I need to understand. There's something about this place. And you, Agnes." Lucas stepped forward. "We found a room in the memory passage," he said, unable to hide his curiosity. "A room with a book that seemed to know us, to ask us questions." Agnes's eyes widened slightly and she let out a sigh. "Ah, you found the Book of Lost Stories," she said. "I wondered if it might reveal itself to you." "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with awe. Agnes gestured for them to follow her to a quiet corner of the shop. The shelves here were filled with books that looked even older and more worn than the others, their spines faded from years of use. She pulled a small, dusty volume from the shelf and opened it, revealing handwritten notes and sketches that seemed to belong to different eras. The Book of Lost Stories is a record of memories, dreams, and tales that were never finished, Agnes explained. It appears only to those who are searching for something they've lost, something they can't quite name. Emily frowned, touching the edge of the old book. But why would it show us our memories? And why now? Agnes's expression softened. "Because sometimes the stories we leave unfinished are the ones that shape us the most," she said. "The book was trying to guide you. It wanted you to see what you've been carrying with you all these years." Emily's gaze dropped, her fingers tracing the spine of the book. "My mother's story. I've been trying to hold on to it, searching for answers, for closure. But maybe it's time to write my own ending." Lucas watched her carefully. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she was wrestling with her emotions. "Emily," he said gently, "whatever happened in the past, you don't have to carry it alone. We can write new stories together." Emily looked up, her eyes filled with a gratitude that took Lucas by surprise. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've spent so long looking back, I forgot how to look forward." Agnes nodded approvingly, her eyes twinkling. "That's the spirit of this place," she said. "It's not just about books or stories, it's about finding the courage to turn the page and start anew." Suddenly a soft chime echoed through the shop, like the sound of a bell ringing from a distant tower. Agnes's face grew serious, and she turned toward the front door, which was slowly creaking open. A man stepped inside, his clothes soaked from the rain outside. He looked lost, almost ghostly, as if he'd wandered in from another time. Agnes stepped forward. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice kind but cautious. The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the shop as if he were searching for something he couldn't quite see. I need a book," he stammered. "Something I lost a long time ago." Emily's breath caught in her throat. There was something eerily familiar about this man, something that tugged at the edges of her own memories. She looked to Agnes, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps I can help," Emily said, stepping forward. "What kind of story are you looking for?" The man's eyes met hers, and in that moment, it was as if the entire shop held its breath. "I'm looking for a story about a woman," he said. "A woman I once loved. I can't remember her face anymore." Agnes placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Come with me," she said softly. "There's a book you need to see." She led the man to the back of the shop, where the shelves seemed to part like curtains. Lucas and Emily exchanged a look, their curiosity piqued, but they remained where they were, sensing that this was something the man needed to do alone. As the man disappeared into the shadows, Emily turned to Lucas. "Do you think he's like us?" she asked quietly. "Searching for something he lost?" Lucas nodded slowly. "I think we all are, in our own way," he said. "But maybe that's what this place is for, to help us find it." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soft murmur of the rain against the windows. The shop felt alive with the sound, as if the very walls were whispering stories of their own. After a while, Agnes returned, her face serene. "He found what he was looking for," she said simply. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?"
Agnes smiled. "Not everything needs an explanation," she said. "Sometimes the story ends when it's meant to, and sometimes the ending is just the beginning of something new." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "You're as mysterious as this shop, Agnes." She winked at him. "Maybe that's part of the magic," she said. "Now, I believe it's time for you both to write the next chapter of your own story." Emily took Lucas's hand, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The storm outside had begun to fade, and a soft, golden light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over the old bookshop by the sea. As they stood there, hand in hand, Emily realized that she no longer felt lost. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Together, they turned toward the door, ready to step into the unknown and face whatever came next, knowing they would do it side by side.
The old bookshop by the sea was quieter than ever that morning, the kind of quiet that hinted at the world holding its breath. Lucas and Emily arrived together, hand in hand, feeling a new sense of anticipation. Agnes greeted them at the door with a gentle smile, as if she'd been expecting them. Today was going to be different. They could both sense it. "There's one last place in the shop I'd like you to see," Agnes said, leading them toward a staircase they hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away behind a tall shelf of dusty books, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The stairs creaked under their feet as they descended, the air growing cooler and filled with a faint, salty breeze. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a dimly lit room that felt more like a cavern than part of the shop. The walls were lined with old, crumbling scrolls, and in the center was a pool of shimmering water that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The surface rippled gently, reflecting the soft golden beams of light that filtered through a crack in the ceiling. "This is the sea of unwritten pages," Agnes said softly, her voice echoing around the cavernous space. "It's where all the stories that haven't been told yet live, waiting for someone to discover them." Lucas knelt down beside the pool, dipping his fingers into the water. It felt warm and soothing, like a gentle embrace. Tiny, glowing pages floated up to the surface, each one blank, as if inviting him to write something. He looked up at Agnes, puzzled. "These are the stories that haven't yet found their authors," she explained. "They are the moments, the possibilities, the dreams left unwritten, and sometimes they show glimpses of the future." Emily crouched beside him, mesmerized by the shimmering pool. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But why are you showing this to us now?" Agnes's eyes softened. "Because it's time for you to choose," she said. "Every visitor to the bookshop is drawn here for a reason. The stories you've encountered, the memories you've unearthed, they've all led you to this moment." Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Agnes's words. "What kind of choice?" he asked. Agnes motioned toward the pool. "You can each take a page from the sea," she said. "But be careful. Once you touch a page, you must write your next chapter. You cannot leave it blank, and you cannot change what you write once it's on the page." Emily's heart pounded. "You mean we get to decide our own future?" Agnes nodded. "Yes, but it's more than that. The choice you make here will shape not only your own story, but the stories of everyone you touch in the future. It's a gift and a responsibility." Emily looked down at the pool, her reflection staring back at her. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, her past pain, her lost dreams, but also the hope she felt now, the promise of a future she could shape. She hesitated, then reached out and took a page. It felt warm in her hand, like it was alive. Lucas followed suit, plucking a page from the water. The moment he touched it, he felt a jolt of energy surge through him, as if the page were connecting him to something greater than himself. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Agnes smiled. "Now, you write," she said simply. Emily took a deep breath, staring at the blank page in her hand. She closed her eyes and thought about everything she'd experienced, the moments of joy, the pain she'd held onto for so long, the fear of the unknown. Slowly, she began to write, letting her heart guide her pen. Words flowed effortlessly, pouring out her hopes and dreams for the future. She wrote about healing, about love, about stepping into the unknown with courage and trust. Lucas watched her for a moment, then looked down at his own page. He hesitated, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty. But as he began to write, he realized that the page wasn't just a canvas for his words, it was a mirror for his soul. He wrote about his journey, about finding purpose, about discovering love in the most unexpected places. He wrote about Emily, and the future he wanted to build with her. When they both finished, they held up their pages to show Agnes. She studied them for a moment, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing smile. "You've chosen well," she said. "But remember, the story isn't finished yet. It never is." Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her, like she'd finally found a piece of herself she hadn't realized was missing. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Agnes nodded. "This place will always be here for you," she said. "But it's time for you to take your stories out into the world. There are people who need to hear them." Lucas reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "Are you ready?" he asked. Emily looked back at the shimmering pool one last time, then turned to Lucas with a smile. "I am," she said. "Let's write our story together." Hand in hand, they made their way back up the creaky staircase, leaving the sea of unwritten pages behind. As they stepped into the light of the bookshop, they felt the world around them shift slightly, as if the very fabric of reality had changed. Agnes watched them go, her smile tinged with a hint of sadness but filled with pride. She knew that they were ready, that they had found the courage to face the unknown and embrace whatever lay ahead. And as the door of the old bookshop by the sea swung shut behind them, the pages of their new story began to turn, carried forward by the winds of fate and the choices they had made together. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the old bookshop by the sea. For Lucas and Emily, it felt like the end of an era, yet also the start of something new. They stood together in the doorway, looking back at the place that had changed their lives in ways they couldn't have imagined. The comforting scent of old books and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air, wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Agnes appeared from behind a tall bookshelf, her face lit with a serene smile. "It seems you're ready," she said, her eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and sadness. "I think we are," she replied, squeezing Lucas's hand. They had shared so many moments here, moments of discovery, of laughter, of deep reflection. It was hard to believe they were about to leave it all behind. Agnes walked over to them, holding two small wrapped packages. "These are for you," she said, placing one in each of their hands. "Consider them a parting gift." Lucas unwrapped his first. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank, but its cover etched with a golden compass. He ran his fingers over the intricate design, understanding its significance immediately. It was a reminder to trust his inner guide, to navigate the uncharted waters of his future with courage and conviction. Emily's package contained a simple silver bookmark, engraved with a single word: "Begin." She held it up, tears welling in her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You both have your own stories to write now," Agnes said softly. "The bookshop has given you what you needed, but the rest is up to you." Lucas stepped forward, taking Agnes's hand in his. "Thank you," he said earnestly, "for everything. I don't think we would have found our way without you." Agnes squeezed his hand, her smile bittersweet. "Perhaps," she said. "Or perhaps you were always meant to find your way here. The bookshop simply helped you see what was already inside you." Emily leaned in and hugged Agnes tightly. "I'll never forget this place," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'll never forget you." Agnes chuckled softly, patting Emily's back. "Oh, my dear, no one ever truly forgets the old bookshop by the sea," she said. "It has a way of lingering in the hearts of those who are meant to remember." They stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against their faces. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a beautiful twilight over the water. The waves lapped gently at the shore, whispering secrets of faraway places and uncharted adventures. As they walked away from the shop, hand in hand, they noticed something curious. When they turned back for one last look, the shop was gone. Where it had once stood, there was now only a stretch of sandy beach, untouched and serene, as if the bookshop had never existed at all. Emily gasped, looking at Lucas in disbelief. "Did we imagine it?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Lucas shook his head, a smile spreading across his face. "No," he said. "We didn't imagine it. It was real. It was just magic." They stood there for a moment, letting the realization sink in. The bookshop had given them what they needed, and now it had moved on, ready to help the next souls in need of its wisdom. "Do you think we'll ever find it again?" Emily asked, her eyes searching the horizon as if the bookshop might suddenly reappear. Lucas pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe," he said, "but even if we don't, we'll always carry a piece of it with us, in our hearts, in our story." Emily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You're right," she said, "and now it's time for us to write our next chapter." Together, they turned and walked away from the sea, feeling lighter than they ever had before. The journal in Lucas's hand and the bookmark in Emily's felt like anchors, grounding them in their new sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they also knew they had everything they needed to face it: each other, their memories, and the lessons they had learned from the old bookshop by the sea. As they disappeared into the twilight, the sky lit up with 1,000 stars, as if the universe itself were blessing their journey. Somewhere far away, the sound of a bell tinkled softly, a final farewell from the shop that had been their haven. And with that, the story of the old bookshop by the sea came to an end, but the story of Lucas and Emily was just beginning. If you had the chance to visit the old bookshop by the sea, what book do you think Agnes would hand to you? What story do you need to discover to help you write your next chapter?